Welcome once again to the Faith Ventures podcast. I'm Dr. Norman Horn, and today joining me is my good friend, Ryan Paterno. Brian is the Vice President of Facilities at EOS Fitness and has had a really interesting career ranging from retail and all sorts of other interesting things, leading to what is now as one of the in charge of one of the biggest fitness organizations in the country. So, Ryan, welcome to the show. I'm so glad to have you with us.
Honored to be here, Norman. Let's have some fun.
Yeah, definitely. And so, I'm just curious, like, how do you get to become a vice president of facilities? Typically, I think of, fitness places and whatnot as being, it's locally run and it's all, kind of nitty gritty details of just what's going on in the local community. But obviously there's big ones like this. How does this run and how do you become, the VP of a fitness facility in the first place? That's kind of crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, for EOS Fitness, we're the largest corporately owned fitness industry in the fitness industry. So it's been great to be here. But yeah, my journey has been on the outside looking in pretty linear. But there's been a lot of messy middle of kind of where I started to kind of where I was able to get now. So while I was a kinesiology major. I was convinced. I was working through college. I was working at country clubs, waiting tables, doing all that, making money while I was going through. And I was, wanting to be. I was, exercise science, physical therapist, PE coach. That's the journey that I was gonna get into. That's what I was convinced of. I love working out. I love sports. And I was like, what do you like to do in your sports? You go to gyms and you work at you're a PE teacher. Great. That was the goal. And upon graduating, I just kind of I got into some entry-level management and fell in love with it. I loved it. And I was really fortunate to have amazing leaders that were just poured into me. And that's when I started learning kind of how to set expectations and how to follow up. And this is how you drive for results. And this is how you have a sense of urgency in your working. And I just fell in love with it. So I started going through there, and I started working my way up. Like you mentioned earlier, I was like in retail for years. Then I got into some property management, and now it all kind of came full circle back in the fitness industry. We're working on my kinesiology degree and back in the fitness space, and I'm loving it. And really, I owe it all to the anchor of all this has been Christ.
Yeah.
Through everything from the beginning, whether I was waiting tables to running teams on a national level. I am humbled to say, Christ has led me each and every day, and he's how I direct my behavior, all the challenges we go through, and he's been the one that's been guiding me.
Awesome. And you said there, this was kind of interesting to me, is that you talked about early on, you were getting kind of into management. Now, some of us, like out there, we don't always have a positive view of being a manager. We don't always think that well of our managers even. Sometimes it's because we don't understand them, and some of it's because they're bad. So, what were some of the, like, when you think of yourself as a manager, kind of describe a little bit more about what does that mean to you? And how does the way that you the way that means to you, what you think about that kind of play into, I don't know, just like what is your management style? How do you build Christ into that?
Absolutely. That's a great question. Yeah, definitely that perception of a lot. You're watching movies or cartoons. You see, as soon as they come in, you start sitting upright, and you have to make sure you're doing the whole thing, and you can't mess up, and the things that in work. I am fortunate to have been developed I'm all about servant leadership. My job is what barriers are you having? And what barriers can I remove to make sure that you're successful? That's what I'm about. And really, in my faith, leading and with behavior is God. There's two things: God, love people. So if we're not loving our people, we're not leading and we're not managing effectively. So that's really been my all the way just from the very entry level. Just kind of learning that. Say, hey, if you can really get the buy-in of your folks, that's really the thing. That's everything. Because entry, whether you're entry level or higher level, you need to be, make sure you're giving radical candor, receiving feedback, and we're in this together. Because that real life events happen. Real life things happen, and we need to make sure we're there, and they know that we're there for them. I can think of just a few examples. Just this year, a few months ago, I had a long-term associate pass away from a tragic hit and run. And it's and we go through that. And as we know, when these life events happen, we like the bills are still due, businesses seem to be run, and now I have a team looking onto me for guidance. And right now I have team members that over in Tampa with a horrible Hurricane Milton, and they some of them lost their homes. Some of them have a long way to go to get their homes repaired, and they're going through it. They're boots on the ground going through it. And how do you lead as a leader in times of crisis, times of conflict, times of stress, times of pressure? Usually that's when there's challenges, is when there's times of like, hey, we have a lot going on right now. And the answer is love God, love people. So like I come in with my faith every day. And whether it's, hey, we have accountability here, recognition, or just a hug and saying, hey, I'm here for you. Really putting them first and letting them know that, we're going to communicate. We're here for your success and for work, but also for your personal life. We care about you as human beings. Like, we're all made in the image of God. So that's how I like to approach things, is approaching everyone. You're made in the image of God, and I'm here for your success. Because a lot of the decisions that we make as leaders affect people and affects their lives. And we got to take that to heart.
Yeah. Well, so here's an interesting kind of touch point here. Okay. You said you've been a Christian a long time. You've let Christ lead you through your leadership challenges. I want to get into some of those maybe more specific challenges and things you've learned there. But I'm curious, does that, all the stuff that you've learned and practiced in your leadership capacities with EOS and in your past, do you bring that into the church as well? And like, what kind of, sometimes it's one thing to say, oh, I bring Christ into the workplace this way. But do you ever kind of like, what do you learn from your work that you bring into the church back and help you lead there?
Absolutely. That's great. So I remember when I moved to Pasadena. We were in Pasadena. We were in this new, just got set up in a new church, was going through the membership class, and I remember my pastor during that, he's like, hey, we need help with projections. Would you be able to? And I was like, oh, I'm the least technical person you'll ever meet, but like if there's a need, I'm happy to jump in there. Yeah. So I jump in there, got trained, probably messed things up, but I was going through there, and then over time, I was in there. I was asked, hey, now that you've been in there, could you be the leader of the projection team? Seems like you kind of know what's going on here, and maybe you can kind of help like train and lead the schedule. And I was like, awesome, yeah, I would love to do that. So I started doing that. And then after a few months later, they're like, our security teams and our greeting teams and other events can kind of use a little bit of a leadership here. Would you mind kind of stepping in, kind of like running those teams? I was like, love it. Yeah, I'll happy to do that. And then, long story short, probably a few months later, I was the church admin for the whole church, and currently am the church admin for the whole church, making sure that all the logistics, facilities, everything goes well on a day-to-day basis, whether it's the worship team, the setup, the tear down, and all that stuff. So yeah, like it absolutely translates, and it was very organically, just trying to do a good job serving the Lord, being a good steward, a volunteer, and then just naturally just doing what I was asked and kind of like having that same thing. So it absolutely goes workplace, church. When you take care of your people and doing all that stuff and serving God, He's going to open up doors for you.
Now hold on here. Now, this is interesting. Which came first, the VP facilities of EOS, or did you become VP facilities of your church first? That's
funny. Yeah, so I was in the church admin. I've been the church administrator for probably 3 years before, and so I think that really was helping probably guide a lot of those things as well. That I haven't thought about it that way, but yeah, that innate leadership of doing all that stuff is probably God leading me, getting me ready for the positions that were to come.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting kind of recognition there, because I've seen, at least for me too, similar. Like, I have taken lessons from leading people through Libertarian Christian Institute, and I brought that into my day-to-day work at Seal Shield and elsewhere, and then vice versa. I've taken stuff that I've learned from being a leader in Seal Shield and elsewhere, and taking that back and tried to apply that into LCI. And I think that there's this virtuous cycle there between the work that we do regularly, because in the end, all of it is kind of working for the Lord. If we're working in earnestness and working, with that in mind, all of it is kind of working for the Lord. And so let's do all things with that. And so it's curious. It's like, oh, who knew that this, of course, would happen? So
right, in all things, do it all for the glory of God and do it well.
Yeah, well, that's a really kind of one of the emphatic points of this podcast, right? Is that we're trying to display this is how we become better workers for the Lord in all environments that we're in. So love that. Well, let's kind of shift back to the challenges that we face in business and elsewhere are sometimes just massive. And so what I'd like to ask you is, where have you found, some big challenges that you have had to approach in your career journey where your faith has played a big role? I imagine that, you've held repeated, interesting, large scale positions. What kinds of things have you encountered that kind of where your faith has played a big role?
Absolutely. So like I mentioned earlier, I'm noticing most of those challenges do come when things are going well, like, hey, we're not having challenges, like things are running, but more often than not, we're going to have conflict. We're going to have stress and pressure and different things like that. And for me, it's when those life events happen. Yeah. So when those things happen where people are just going through it in their personal lives, and maybe they're feeling that they're overwhelmed, and maybe they are looking to delegate something, and then they end up pointing at themselves, and they really they need to be able to get those barriers removed. So for me, challenges for me have been, how do I get inside and how do I set them up for success in a way that they feel that they are going to be doing well in their role. So for example, I mentioned earlier, kind of like, when they've had life events happen, whether they've lost their house, whether they have a family member that's been lost. For me, I like to be able to come in, give radical candor, and put my arm around them. At the same time, there's a lot of challenge, like you mentioned earlier. The manager that's kind of like always like giving direction, things like that. I believe that we could do much better with how being a servant to our folks, right? Yeah. How can we give radical candor? So if we're having some accountability issues, being effective, communicate effectively to that. We're making sure that we're communicating effectively, that they know where they're at, good news, bad news, making sure that they understand where they're going. So there's been a lot of challenges. There's always going to be an emergency, especially in the facilities world. You're always going to have, pipe bursts and things like that. But as long as our team feels that support. So that's what I've kind of come in is, hey, if there's a problem, we can fix it. We just have the right mindset.
Mm-hmm. So let me kind of let me ask it expand upon that question in a slightly different way, because I think that you operate in a really interesting arena where there's the distance between you and the customer and is kind of different than, say, in my world of engineering and healthcare and stuff like that. There's I am one step removed from endpoint consumers, if you will. But yours is also different than, say, the hospitality industry or a food service per se, where you're much closer to waiter or waitress, to the customer. This is a little different. So when you think about the way in which your business orients itself towards treating customers right, what are some of the most important things that you find, or maybe not necessarily most important, what are some of the unique things that you find are important to keep in mind, and that might be unexpected from to people like me who don't know the first thing about being a VP of facilities per se? So for me, I like to look at it like when I was working in retail. I was just like you, right in their face, customers facing all the time, and the number one priority was always customer service. So what I've done is I've never let that leave me. I'm not behind. I'm in the field.
I like to always make sure I'm asking for feedback, whether I'm, in the gym, I'm always doing walking chats and getting feedback because that's how we get better. And I empower my teams to do the same. Although we're not necessarily front facing as much as I was in the past, making sure that we're not above making sure that, because at the end of the day, I believe that, our team and customer service are two wings to a bird. Like we need them both. So, but it has been different being not in the day to day. So really from there, just empowering the team, listening to member feedback, seeing what's going on, and overall, how can we give them a good experience? So I am obsessed with the member experience. So when they're here, delivering a good product, a clean product, the teams are on the floor, being respectful, making sure they hearing the feedback. And then when we hear that feedback, taking it seriously. I think that a lot of companies fail because they have their idea and this is how they're going to run their operations. And they let the member feedback go kind of on the back burner where I'm like, hey, if this is something we need to do, if our saunas aren't hot enough, we need to figure out a way to satisfy them here, right? So it's definitely a balance, but I think just not letting that part leave you. And I think a credit to that sales and member facing roles I've had in the past to know the difference.
Okay. So now kind of framing from that, have you found that like there are some particularly interesting challenges there, like in the relationship that you have with the customers where again, I'm looking for kind of the unexpected or the unusual things that might be strange to those of us not in the industry. Cause I'm, trying to seek to understand where is it you come from in that respect. And then if there anything kind of flows from there into like, wow, these types of situations help me to reflect Jesus in some way. I'm kind of curious if that kind of plays into what your work as well. Does anything kind of come to mind there, or does that spark anything?
Oh, absolutely. You would be surprised. And when you ask folks for feedback, more than likely they'll give it to you, and they'll give it to you strong. Just like if you're witnessing, talking to someone with the Lord, asking what their views are, people are scared to do it, but you'll realize people will tell you if you ask. So I was just in a situation a couple weeks ago that I can remember. I guess it looks like we're having some pool heater issues. And I was lucky to get out of there alive. So basically, there was a couple. There was a pool class that had about we'll call them seasoned women that were in there, and the pool was not hot. And I was walking, and I was kind of like, "How's everything going, ladies?" And and all of a sudden, I was able to get some feedback on that. So, but that's feedback I took and was able to kind of make sure we were able to make a plan to course correct some things, right? So, in the way my faith played a role, and I feel like that is treating them with love. Like, thank you so much, and making sure that we're giving them that, like, we're not blowing you off, and we're going to give you that Christ-like service and Christ-like love, just like we would our team or anyone else. So I think that having that in you really just comes out manifolds that, hey, this person's genuine. He's going to help us. At the very end, I mentioned that I got there alive. They were very thankful. Love me, like, hey, you're here. We're taking your request seriously. So it definitely translates in any field, treating those Christ-like and making sure that we're genuine in our response.
Yeah, and it feels like that's like that would probably play into in some sense the way in which you now think about even witnessing. You kind of mentioned that the displaying Christ's love in this way. Does that kind of resonate like with the way in which you now do ministry too? Like, do you find that these things that you learn, again, kind of going back to that virtuous circle of things that you learn and bringing it back in it. And I think that's just really interesting. And if you have something to that effect that you relay to us, that would be awesome.
Yeah, that'd be great. And with these, like when you pray for God to open doors, He opens them. So I think that definitely working with folks, and as you whether you're on the plane and you're getting in a conversation, it's just having a conversation and just like treating it like just having a conversation. We're able to with some peers, we're able to we're having dinner where I was traveling. I believe I was in Texas, and some topics come up while you're having dinner, and I was able just to kind of speak to the gospel. And just going over here, and this is like what I believe, and this is why, and this is how I feel like is God, my faith, what for my life. Because it's funny, I was in Utah, and I think about it, I was in Utah, I was in Salt Lake City, and then while we're having dinner there, all the leadership group there, and one person asked me, Ryan, can I ask you a personal question? I'm like, yeah, of course. Are you part of the LDS church? And I was like, no, I'm not. I'm a Christian. Apparently, if you're not smoking, drinking, and cursing during dinner, you're all of a sudden you're not part of the LDS church. So I was like, and that was it led to a great conversation to explain kind of this is where I was at. So I think being prepared for those conversations and just treating them, hey, these are people, and we're gonna show God's love on them. And just when God opens the door, be ready for it.
Yeah. Well, and I can only imagine that the way in which that you continue to interact with customers, continue to interact with your own people in this respect. It's that there's so many opportunities to learn on just how to interact well with a lot of different types of people. And I can't imagine that the gym is not a place where you learn that. So
absolutely. That's true.
So when you think about shifting a little bit to I'm going back and forth between business principles and faith principles and whatnot, but that's what you expect when you come to this show. But I'm curious if you might enumerate to us, a lot of times the industries are full of almost mysteries to us. We find that, if people have no idea, like what I do in the intersection of biology and chemical engineering and healthcare, and it takes some explaining as to why do we do things the way that we do. And I'm curious, do you find that there are, especially if there's some kind of faith pre-commitments there too, do you find that people sometimes misunderstand what the kinds of things that you do especially as a manager? But in the broader fitness industry as well, what kind of things surprise you? I didn't realize that people didn't understand this about my industry, or especially if it's something that Christians particularly don't understand, about what you do. Is there anything
Absolutely.
kind of mind there?
I think every career that I've had, when I'm, you're kind of speaking about it, and there'll be, there's always a misconception of what the role is and what we're doing. And I think that's great. I think it's great to be able to then have a conversation. This is kind of what I do. And also this is the why, for facilities wise, there's a lot on the outside looking in, everything's beautiful. Everything looks great, but there's a lot that has to go into it and be able to explain to people and say, hey, whether it's a construction, whether it's we have to deal with emergencies, there's floods, there's fires, there's government regulations. There's a lot that goes into it as well. And that before I got into facilities and all things, I always thought, they run. If there's something wrong, you call a plumber, and that's that. And there's a lot that goes into it. So I always love learning what everyone else is going into, what I like to go into, and then also be able to use your strengths. Because I think that different industries, whether you're doing facilities, engineering, leadership is leadership. People are people. And from there, you can go into and kind of just explain, hey, this is how I lead. This is how I go into here. There's a lot of logistical differences. But really, once you get into a role where you're managing folks, it's all about just servant leadership and going into setting expectations, following up, accountability, and really communicating effectively with your team. So I think that although there's a lot of differences in different companies, there's really similar leadership, how you treat people.
Awesome. I'm gonna put you on the spot here, and if this doesn't work, maybe we'll cut it. But
I'm excited. Okay.
But I'm just curious because this came up actually as in a sermon recently, and since we're talking about management, let's talk about the parable of the shrewd manager for just a second. Do you remember that one? So in this, I'm curious. From being a manager and the point of view there. The parable of the shrewd manager is where this guy, the manager is going to fire one of his, or the owner is going to fire one of his lower level people, and then the lower level person goes out and immediately starts going, what am I going to do? Oh, I'm going to cut people's debts so that I can win friends in this way, and he goes off and has one of them. Your debt is 100 bushels of wheat, make it 50. Yours is 50 cans of oil, make it 25, and so on. I'm just curious, from a manager's point of view, when you read this parable, the shrewd manager, does anything kind of strike you as interesting or funny, or what do you kind of does that just strike you as bizarre? Or I'm just curious what you think about that.
It does, absolutely. And there is through the example you gave, there's all kinds of leadership examples in the Bible.
Mhm.
From there as well. Like there's a lot of I think there's a misconception of like, hey, Christians that you're going to get walked over. There's no accountability. If
Mhm.
you look at it, God, Adam was given the task of leading the Garden of Eden.
Yeah.
Moses was told to talk to the rock, things like that, right? And
Mhm.
and there's a lot of accountability, and there's accountability. A lot of
Mhm.
kings that were given a lot of responsibility weren't meeting
Yeah.
expectations and how God intended for them to lead, right? But from there was accountability.
Mhm.
Adam got kicked out of the Garden of Eden, right? Moses didn't get to the promised land. A lot of the kings were held accountable for some of the things that they did. So I look at it and I say, when God gives us a task, just like when we give us a task, we see it to go see it to completion.
Mhm.
And I think there's a lot of misconception of like, hey, we're going to be able to just do things the way we want or almost do it almost and be able to lead it. And that's not going to fly,
Mhm.
right? Moses went up. And then Aaron was there, and when Aaron was by himself over there, all of a sudden everyone turned, right?
Yeah.
Right, probably some opportunities with leadership there, right? And
You
then when he
think,
came
yeah.
in, and God doesn't take those excuses, those excuses. So I think I look at that, and I think we can lead like have our expectations high, and not think about like, hey, not be shrewd, but like
Mhm.
just have our high expectations, and God will lead us through it.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I definitely appreciate that. Like it's just being, again, kind of referring back to this idea of like we're servant leaders in through
Yeah.
all of this. And I think there's a promise there that, if we treat our people who are under us with the respect that we believe that they do deserve, and we lead with that in mind, then there's going to be blessing in that. And so I think
Absolutely.
that's a great thing to remember. And it's something that does bear out in scripture as well. We see that all over the place.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, even looking at on the flip side, we see strong leaders that came in here,
Mhm.
trusted, like Joseph, someone
Mhm.
that come in, like like he mentioned, what the enemy meant for bad, God meant for good, and he
Yep.
resisted his temptation. Paul went into some hazardous environments and took it through. Christ even we look at Christ, and his church was being defiled, and he came in and he started whipping some people into shape. No
Yeah.
pun intended. Right there. So he started doing that, and I think on the outside looking in, you think of maybe that guy right there. He's not acting like a Christian or acting like Jesus. They would tell Jesus that if he was doing that today. When there's like righteous and how when we're given a task, we need to see it through.
Yeah, awesome. Well, as we draw to a close, I want to ask you kind of my closing question I always like to ask people, which is, if you were like given all your experiences, all the things that you've learned over your career thus far, and you think about like the types of things that you would have liked to know when you were a younger person,
Mhm.
and this is great for some of our younger listeners to kind of reflect upon. These are some of the most important things that we garner along the way as we're working as adults and throughout our career. If you could imagine like going back in time, and giving some advice to your younger self about what you've learned about career, about life, about faith, and the intersections of all those things together, especially given what we've already talked about, what kind of
Yeah.
things would you want to communicate to us today?
That's a great question. So there's a lot of things when I look at when I think all of those steps were necessary pains for me to go through to get where I am. But I could think of a good example that might be able to kind of clarify it a little bit. I think I remember a few years ago,
Mm-hmm.
my boss, I was my day off. Like I was off, and my boss was like, "Hey, I'm going to be heading over to this property," or I caught wind of it, I think is what happened. So then I realized, okay, he's going to my property. I kind of like showed up, course corrected a little bit, put some right place and right here, made a game plan, kind of did all those things. And when boss came, everything was kind of straight. And he's like, aren't you off today? And I was like, oh yeah, no, I was off today, but I just wanted to, come in, just, right, and I was talking like that a little bit. And he's like, he's like, I know things are going well when you're here. I want to see what things are like when you're not here. And you're not going to be able to get to where you want to be if you're not able to lead, and you're not able to stand like all these things. You're not able to like set expectations with your team and be able to like put yourself out of a job and let it run without you. And that really stuck with me because I was always just like, ownership, and I just wanted to own it. And regardless if my team did something, I'll just take it on myself. And the higher I went, you can't own everything. So I would tell myself that, so there were some growing pains of me trying to, maybe not holding folks accountable and trying to own everything and not, delegating as I should. And so I would tell myself definitely like the roles that you want to be at, whether you want to be in leadership, whether you want to be the best engineer you can be, see what that role entails and kind of start to practice and start to put those principles into effect. So for me, for leadership, I had to learn how to lead. I had to learn how to set expectations. I had to learn all that. Whereas, because if not, I was just going to get swarmed because you can't own it all. So I say that story because it was a funny thing, and I really stuck with me because it's he's a mentor to me to this day because I had to learn that in my leadership.
Awesome. I think what a great lesson. And you set that up so well. That is really, really good. And to think about, you want things to be, how are you setting things up to run well when you're not there? Yeah. And I think that's a great lesson, and there's a lot of ways in which that comes into play for us, whether, you can think about that in terms of being part of a family, part of a church, your student group, any of those sorts of elements, like those are like, that's really good. I didn't expect that to go that direction. So thank you for that. That's really valuable.
Absolutely. It's helped me in my faith as well. Just we have to be who we want to be.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for being part of this and for being willing to come and talk, through some tricky and difficult things at times about what it means to be a good leader, a good manager, and all of this, and how do we integrate our faith in that. So, Ryan, if you want to say anything about if you have like social media handles you want to promote for just a second, and just let us know, if you'd like to do that, as well as what is if people want to find out more about EOS Fitness, how can they do that?
Absolutely. So yeah, EOS Fitness, we're going from great to go. We're going. So if you're in Florida, Texas, Arizona, Utah, Nevada, California, look it up. Call us up for your complimentary workout, and more states, and I think on the way. We're up and coming. So awesome. Yeah, I'll be able to on LinkedIn as well. If you want to connect, I'm happy to connect with anyone.
Awesome. We'll really appreciate that, Ryan. Again, thank you for being here. It's been an honor to have you on the Faith Ventures podcast, sir.
Awesome. Thanks, Norman.
All right. We will see you next time.